Page 584, a poem by Yehuda Amichai. The man under his fig tree telephoned the man under his vine. Tonight they definitely might come. Assign positions, armor plate the leaves, secure the tree. Tell the dead to report home immediately. The white lamb leaned over, said to the wolf, humans are bleating, and my heart aches with grief. I'm afraid they'll get to gunpoint, to bayonets in the dust. At our next meeting, this matter will be discussed. All the nations united will flow to Jerusalem to see if the Torah has gone out. And then, inasmuch as it's spring, they'll come down and pick flowers from all around. And they'll beat swords into plowshares and plowshares into swords, and so on, and back and forth. Perhaps from being beaten thinner and thinner, the iron of hatred will vanish forever. This poem reads like it could have been written yesterday. A day when the State of Israel announced they would not allow the Secretary General of the United Nations to enter the country because he did not denounce forcefully enough the onslaught of over 180 missiles launched by Iran towards Israel. It must be said that the United Nations Secretary General insists he did condemn Iran for this action. And in his insistence yesterday, he again issued, or he at least did issue, a condemnation, perhaps again. Israel's government these days is very right-wing, but this poem is not written from the perspective of the right. Yehuda Amichai is not particularly associated with the Israeli right. One of his poems is inscribed on a wall in the Yitzhak Rabin Center in Tel Aviv, so that perhaps is an indication of where he was positioned in Israeli society, politically, socially, religiously. Yehuda Amichai has been dead now for 25 years, so all the ironically expressed frustration that he writes of here has been around for a while. Were he still alive today, he would be 100 years old this year. He was born in Germany, served in the British Army during World War II, and in the Israeli Army in the wars of 1948, 1956, and 1973, and his poems express a longing for peace. Yet he would surely have been aware of the annual September United Nations ritual where the General Assembly would meet and every year enter into a debate as to whether Israel could be ceded until one of the Scandinavian countries would submit a resolution allowing it then to be ceded. The procedure was so routine, it had a name, the Nordic Resolution. I remember living in Israel one year when this happened, and it was so routine. It was not the first story on the news, not the second, but the third story reported in the televised news. It was just par for the course, and a further example of why the United Nations was generally seen as not worth very much. The United Nations has a compound on a hill overlooking Jerusalem, in what was the house of the British High Commissioner during the time of the British Mandate. When the British left in May 1948, this house passed into the possession of the United Nations, and it continues to be the United Nations offices in Jerusalem. Due to the role of that hill in the crucifixion story within Christian tradition, that hill has a name, the Hill of Evil Counsel. An irony, to be sure. But for many in Israel, both on the right and the left, the name seems fitting. And Yehuda Amichai, in his poem, references here that cynicism. All the nations united will flow to Jerusalem to see if the Torah has gone out. And then, inasmuch as it's spring, they'll come down and pick flowers from all around. presumably coming down from the hill of evil counsel. But his cynicism is laced with hope. Hope found in imagery from Jewish tradition. And they'll beat swords into plowshares and plowshares into swords, and so on and back and forth. Perhaps from being beaten thinner and thinner, the iron of hatred will vanish forever. The Hope is the name of Israel's national anthem, Hatikva. And sometimes hope is all we have to work with. There are organizations on the ground in Israel today acting on hope. There's Givat Chaviva in the north of the country, which Temple Beth Shalom made a donation to this past year, which grows out of the kibbutz movement and works to build relationships between Jews and Arabs in Israel in the context of a stronger shared society that they hope to see. There's an organization called Roots in the center of the country, which is an improbable dialogue center, a dialogue center between Palestinian Arabs and West Bank Jewish settlers. There's the Arava Center in the south of the country that brings Arabs, Jews, and others together to focus on peace and environmental issues in the desert. And there are so many more efforts which deserve support and attention. They need to be highlighted so a vision of peace can come forward. Significantly, neither the visions of right-wing politicians nor the visions of left-wing campus protesters contain what is necessary to bring together people on the ground who truly want peace. Both of these are distractions that become obstacles in themselves. Our Torah reading today describes conflict and resolution. The conflict described there is within the family. Sarah is upset with something about Ishmael, the son of Hagar, regarding something to do with Isaac, Sarah's own son. Perhaps it is about who will inherit Abraham's legacy. The text certainly says so specifically. Perhaps she perceives Ishmael as a threat to Isaac. There is something Ishmael was doing, mitzachek, with Isaac. Sarah wants a full separation from Hagar and her son. Abraham is torn by this. What follows is a tremendous amount of back and forth until God, on some level, provides for both. Ishmael will be the father of nations just as will Isaac. This dance of conflict continues, a dance of conflict continuing into our day. And hopefully this dance of conflict someday will lead again to resolution. Ishmael becomes acknowledged as a leading patriarch of Islam, while Isaac is a patriarch of the Jewish people. Some contemporary prayers we have pray for peace between Bnei Hagar and Bnei Yitzchak, between the children of Hagar and the children of Isaac. We can see in this a conflict and the potential for resolution between cousins. And we can read into this something about current geopolitical conflicts we face and the hope for resolution. This account in the Torah immediately is followed in our reading by a story of Avraham and Avimelech, who also have a conflict about land and water and resources, just like conflicts still going on today. And they do a dance of negotiation as well, and they forge a covenant, brit. Perhaps this is another reason why we read this today, because these two forge a brit, a covenant. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is so much about broken covenant and the repair of covenant. Jewish life is based so much on covenant, Jewish thought, a covenant between Israel, the people of Israel, and God. And when we reach this season, we're basically saying this covenant is broken and needs to be repaired. Let us repair it. In today's Torah reading, Avimelech and Abraham forge a covenant, or in the Hebrew idiom, they cut a covenant. And in today's Torah reading, the stated basis of this covenant is in the words, "You shall act toward me and toward the land in which you dwell according to the kindness I have shown you." The word there, kindness, is chesed, and according to the chesed I have shown you. Now, chesed is a multivalent word. It means kindness, loving kindness, acts of compassion, if they're acts of chesed, acts of compassion. But the word also means piety, faithfulness, loyalty. We hear this word in the opening blessing of the Amidah as well. Gomel chasadim tovim v'koneh hakol v'zocher chasdei avot umevi goel livnei v'nehem laman shemo b'ahava. Referring to God as one who causes acts of chesed, master of all, who remembers the chesed of our ancestors and brings redemption to their children's children for the sake of God's name. Our ancestors' children's children, that's us. So God remembers our ancestors' chesed and therefore brings redemption to us. Chesed, loving kindness and loyalty. Perhaps compassion and mutual concern. Our redemption rests upon promises of faithful compassion. Our redemption as a people, the redemption of the world. Compassion towards each other. And as a basis upon which to feel shared compassion. Not only to feel compassion, though, embracing opportunities to act with compassion, with mutual feeling and concern, with the ability to know and feel the situation and the sufferings of others. Empathy, a mutual feeling of chesed. This month, I read of an account which, coming after 35 years of ongoing internal Jewish conflict, amazed me. The account came to my attention in an email from Women of the Wall. I remember the origins of this group, Women of the Wall. Back in 1988, there was a conference on Judaism and feminism in Jerusalem. I knew someone who was there and came back and told this story. The date of this conference on Judaism and feminism overlapped with Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of a Jewish month. And Rosh Chodesh itself is a holiday that has within it a special role, a special emphasis on women's celebration. And there is also within traditional Jewish law a provision that if women come together in a minyan, a prayer quorum, where there are no men, they can read Torah on their own, something that women are never otherwise engaged in within most Orthodox settings. So a group of women attending this conference on Judaism and feminism in 1988 in Jerusalem decided to take a Torah scroll to the Western Wall, the Kotel, specifically to the women's section where there would be no men, and hold a women's Torah reading service there. They did this, and within a few days, it was a topic of debate within the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. These and other women continued to hold a women's Torah service every Rosh Chodesh since then, for the past 35 years. It has not been well received always. It has not always been peaceful. There has been violence, assaults, bodily searches, spitting, even the use of tear gas. There have been court cases and court decisions, usually decided in favor of the women, and usually ignored by the government, especially when that government has included the same political parties who have been trying to disempower those same Israeli courts. The women created an organization and a network to support this effort, which perhaps we as a community would want to support. Quite commonly, women of the Wall send out an email to supporters describing the latest developments in their situation. And at the beginning of Elul, a month ago, just after Hamas killed 6 of the hostages held in Gaza, I received this notice from them by email. It was addressed, "Dear friends and supporters, this is not a normal month. Elul, the last month of the year, is always one marked with a special tone, one of love and closeness to God." Read chesed. One of love and closeness to God in the lead up to Rosh Hashanah. But this morning's tone was different for other reasons. And it was impossible to begin praying as if everything were the same. Instead, we dedicated the first 5 minutes of prayer to Hirsch, Carmel, Almog, Ori, Alexander, and Aden, the 6 hostages tragically murdered by Hamas at the beginning of the week. Their memory guided our hearts as we ushered in the month that marks the end of this difficult year. Shortly after, the Kotel Rabbi's loudspeaker, which traditionally faces the women's section. Why would it face the women's section? To disrupt what's going on there. So shortly afterwards, the Kotel Rabbi's loudspeaker, which traditionally faces the women's section, was turned on. In a surprising twist, the cantor's loud voice echoed through the loudspeaker, but did not disrupt our services as it usually does. In fact, this month, we found ourselves in an unexpected duet. During the quiet parts of our prayer, the cantor sang, and when we sang, he was silent. Amazingly, as we recited the Shema, "Hear, O Israel," in harmony, beseeching all of Israel to unite around our God, the other side was engaged in the repetition of the Amidah, begging that same God to Shema Kolenu, hear our voice, have compassion, have chesed upon us, and accept our prayers in mercy and favor. Our usually dueling prayers twisted together in a rare dance this morning, covering the Kotel Plaza in a canopy of unity. The many disputes among the Jewish people did not disappear, but our common identity and our desperate need for a unifying force to lead floated above both sides of the Mechitza barrier. Signed, Yochi Rappaport, Executive Director. The conflict that Yochi Rappaport, on behalf of Women of the Wall, describes still continues. There still is sharp disagreement between those who are willing to see women read at the Wall and those who are not, between those who want to see a more empowered public role for women in Jewish life and those who do not. But I would be interested in seeing how the next month and the next month plays out at the Wall. In the midst of shared suffering of the war and hostage crisis, somehow maybe people in conflict were able to find a shared foundation, a shared feeling of compassion for each other, a sense of compassion and mutual concern a sense of chesed that allowed the other somehow to seem human to them. A sense of compassion, chesed. In the midst of that chesed, they were able to enter into a dance of prayers. Perhaps this dance is only a temporary reprieve. Perhaps it was a picking flowers all around, in the words of Yehuda Amachai's poem. But when I first read that poem, I thought the picking of the flowers meant they were just being irrelevant. But maybe it's the picking of the flowers all the way around that leads to the beating of swords into plowshares and plowshares into swords, which then leads to the exhaustion of the metal of hatred itself. Certainly entering into a dance of dialogue, prayer, and picking flowers together is more constructive than violence around conflict. So maybe we can hear in the shofar a call to encourage more such dances in our private lives and in our public lives as well.